I've decided to talk today about my experiences concerning the consciousness of the dragon and some of the stories of encounters with dragons, both land and sky. So personal experiences I'll start with. So this is a wall hanging, and I came across it in a house I was working at. And at the time I was just putting together the introduction to the Spine of Albion, and I was trying to look for an image that sort of encompassed man's connection with the dragon current. Not man slaying the current or pinning it to the ground, but actually communing with it. And when I got a phone call from a friend of ours who wanted some work doing, I went around and she asked if I could paint the hallway. And as I arrived in the hallway and looked up, I saw this wall hanging. And I said, "Oh my God." And she says, "Oh, the hallway isn't that bad." But I said, no, it's not the condition of the hallway, it's actually the hanging. It's just incredible. She said, "Where did you get that from?" And she said, "My husband's an Irishman, and he lived near Desert O'Day." Anybody knows that? Very remote place in Ireland where this was taken from a cross. And it shows the great sun, or the moon, behind, with a man with his hands willingly inside the mouths of serpents, the twin serpents. And this is key here. And the serpents are connected with the Celtic knot, as you can see. And the Celtic knot, for me, represents the interconnectedness of everything. Our connection with the land, the nature, the earth, the sky, the rocks, the sea, the air. That's this patterning, this sort of network of energy. So for me, this was a good representation of the power of dragon consciousness. And dragon consciousness first came to me while I was on a school trip back in 1974. Because I remember, because Seven Seas of Rye by Queen was #2 in the charts. So I had a strange story to tell here, because we were there supposed to be canoeing, rock climbing, but instead I sort of sneaked off in the morning before the day's adventures and went up to the top of a hill to look at the view. And while I was up there, it was obscured by trees, so I climbed a tree right to the very top. This is in Cumbria, and I looked across the view of Morecambe Bay and Cumbria, and something happened, something snapped inside of me, because I saw an incredible beauty in everything, vivid colours, a kind of love for everything. It was all encompassing, and that seemed to happen for a few moments. But it turned out I was up in that tree all day, because the next thing I knew after experiencing all this wonder was somebody shouting my name, and it was about 5 o'clock in the evening, but I'd gone up that tree about 8:30 in the morning. But it seemed to me only a few minutes had passed. But that feeling never went away from me, that feeling of connection with the land and the sea. It stayed with me because I was 13 at that time, as you know, it's a key age for a lot of people. And the second incident was a connection with what I call sky dragons. This was in the Wye Valley here. Some of you have probably been to Simmons Yacht. Simmons Yacht, or East and West. Well, two good pubs. But on our school trip, we were staying in a school camp nearby, but our teacher, who loved a pint, wanted us to go out for an evening walk, and we had to sit out on the balcony of I forget the name of the pub over there, Saracen's Head, thank you. And while he went inside and had a drink. So there was 9 of us 15-year-old school children outside on this balcony. And it was 9 o'clock, it was around this time of year, around the beginning of May. And somebody said, look, while all of us were looking up at this bright night sky, we saw that looking at the stars, somebody said, "Oh, it's a moving star." And we watched this star moving across, and we thought it must be a shooting star possibly. So, but it was moving at a steady pace, so we thought perhaps it was a plane satellite. But then it stopped. And so all of us, I thought, I've never seen a shooting star stop in the sky before. And somebody said, yeah, that's weird. And so we all started to look at it. So the moment we all put our attention to this ball of light, it came right out the sky and right above us and hovered for what seemed to be about 10 seconds. But in that time, strange things happened, because this was a great ball of energy. It looked like a miniature sun with all its rippling, sort of coloured, fiery energy. And then it seemed to engage warp drive and sort of shoot off down the Wye Valley at incredible speed, leaving 9 of us completely agog and not saying a word to each other. And then the teacher comes in and says, "What's wrong with you lot?" And some says, "Are you going to tell him or shall I?" So we've seen this ball of light. Oh, don't be stupid. But 9 of us all saw it. And on our way back to school camp that night, we were all thinking, was that a UFO? What was that? A lot of people were troubled. Some people said, no, I didn't see anything. The next day, there was all kinds of problems, psychological stuff going on between all of us. And that we'd all seen a different version. And it's only later in life that I realized that this energy was a ball of plasma that's come out of natural Earth geology. That is, in a way, Andrew Collins talks about this in Light Quest, where all over the world there are certain balls of light that are born naturally out of the Earth at a fifth element state of matter called plasma. And it has intelligence because it recognized our attention when all 9 of us looked at it, and it came to investigate us. But what it did, it kind of rewired me, because after then, I started to have a lot of psychic things happen to me. This as well, as Andrew Collins mentions this in his Light Quest book, there are lots of people who've had contact with these plasma, balls of light, will-o'-the-wisps, whatever, have come into contact with a
Sorry, could you go a little bit slower or be a little louder?
Okay. So it was, the energy was an electromagnetic field that we were immersed in. And that electromagnetic field affected our temporal lobe, so we all had strange experiences. So rather like drugs can bring out different experiences in all people, this ball of plasma gave us all different experiences. So when looking through history, there is lots of tales about sky dragons or comets or balls of light. And they usually herald an epoch or a disaster or plagues. But it's another conscious energy that we're only just becoming aware of now. And it's been around us all the time. It's just we've never been, just been in the right place at the right time to encounter these things. But that was one of the landmark experiences of my life. And it wasn't long after then that I started to tune into stone circles and standing stones in the area where I lived, certainly around Cumbria. And Cumbria has over 50 stone circles. And although many people visit stone circles and they sense something powerful about them, I sensed an energy coming from the stones, and I could actually feel it through the palms of my hands. And so I ended up being obsessed with visiting these sites, but eventually I came to settle on an area called Shap, which is just off the A6 south of Penrith. And here are the remains of what we now know as the Serpent Temple. And interestingly enough, it lies upon a line I was going to rediscover many years later, but it lies halfway upon the Belinus line or the Belinus line, as Avebury, the greatest Serpent Temple, lies halfway along the Michael line. So the ancients were also aware of the geographical position of these temples as well as the dragon energy. Shap itself was a magnificent temple with a huge stone circle, much larger than Stonehenge, with 2 avenues leading from it and terminating in little stone circles. Unfortunately, much of it was dynamited in the 16th, 17th centuries. But surrounding the Shap temple, there are over 20 stone circles, many of them now being destroyed. But it is a kind of epicenter of the megalithic culture in Britain. So I felt there was a story to tell here, but I could feel there was something powerful. But it was going to be years and years later until I actually wrote about it in the Spine of Albion. There was actually, after some of this avenue was dynamited, a sketch was done of what remains of it by Lady Lowther here. And you can see these are just the stumps of stones as big as the one you just saw in the last slide. So here there was a kind of worship of the serpent energy. And interestingly enough, they orientated to the north. This avenue leads you in a kind of serpent path towards the northern stars. And if anybody visits Shap, you'll see that a lot of the northern horizon is aspected so that you can see setting stars. This is similar to what we found on the Spine of Albion, that a lot of sites have these viewpoints to the north so that you can observe the northern stars. Another landmark experience in dragon consciousness came with a holiday to Mexico. Just south of Mexico City, there is an ancient town called Cholula. And in Cholula, there's a pyramid-like hill. Does it remind you of something? A bit like St. Michael's Mount, isn't it? You could say energetically it's like the St. Michael's Mount of Mexico, because it has giant mythology, as Hugh knows. Apparently, giants fleeing the flood came to the center of their lands and built this great pyramid. Unfortunately, it's completely covered by foliage, but the church at the top is dedicated to Our Lady of the Remedies. It's got to be the goddess of healing. But to my surprise, when I was walking around this hill, there was an open door. And outside was an elderly gentleman who spoke to me in sort of English, saying, "Would you like a guided tour?" And I said, "Well, where does this tunnel go?" He says, "Deep inside the pyramid to the very, very bottom layer, which is the earliest pyramid." And he said, "Because this pyramid is on top of another pyramid on top of another." So he showed me a sketch of what the original pyramid looked like. And it's very much a Mayan Toltec type pyramid. It's officially the largest, and I mean in volume, pyramid in the world. And it lies in a geographical central position of the Olmec Toltec lands. But the passageway led down, deep, 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 deep down. It felt like was walking down these steps for half an hour. And then eventually we get into this really large chamber, almost about the size of this room. And around all the walls there are these murals showing the Toltec people doing everyday things, praying, cooking, eating, dancing. You can see that with the cooking pot. But the one thing that puzzled me is that they're all sat on this white line. You see the white line? And at the bottom there's the other white line. And I said, "What is this white line?" And the elderly gentleman said, "Well, this is the serpent force." And I said, "Well, why are they all riding on the back of a serpent?" And he said, "Because my ancestors were at one with the earth serpent. And the earth serpent nourished them, and my ancestors nourished the earth serpent." And I said, "Well, how was that done?" And he said, "Well, man has forgotten how to react or interact with the earth serpent now, and he said there is disharmony amongst my people. He said, but here in the oldest room in our country is the depiction of man at harmony with the earth serpent. And I said, well, how can we bring this back? How can we bring harmony to our culture again and good fortune? And he says, by honouring and recognising the dragon force. And I says, how do we do that? He says, listen, feel, sense, allow it to be known. He says, honour it on special days of the year, walk in its pathways, like we're doing this weekend. So that was my first, this was about 96, when I had this encounter with this ancient Indian who gave me an insight into their culture, which is based upon living in harmony with the dragon. And this is a woodcut I'd seen showing the Toltec Indians worshipping the serpent. Interesting enough, you've got the entwined serpents here, just like the Michael, Mary, and our Belinus and Ellen currents, which follow the spine of Albion. And as that holiday progressed, I realised the images of the twin serpent was a bit more than the guides were telling us. The guides were saying that the serpents were gods that people worshipped and they sacrificed to, and that some people say these were evil gods. But in fact, it's all about, as Peter was saying, the duality of male and female, yin and yang, positive and negative, light and dark. The twin serpent is important to creation and life and the fertility in the land. What the Mayans were trying to do, and this is what a lot of people overlook, is that they were trying to correct what was going wrong with their culture. And also the climate. There was a climate change at the time that was causing destruction of their civilization. And so they were sacrificing to the serpent, yes, but they were doing it willingly to try and help the fertility of the land, to bring it back again. So there's a kind of misconception about what was going on about sacrificing to the dragon. And this is also the same theme we've also seen in Bali. On a trip to New Zealand once, we called in it to see this incredible Lampuyang temple in Bali, which has several avenues of twin serpents. Same motif as the Mayans, same belief system as well. And the Balinese people are very gentle people, and they honour the earth serpent, and they offer flowers to their gods and deities every day in altars all over Bali. Those of you who've been to Bali will know this. But there's another culture that's growing stronger in Bali that's pushing them out, so they're becoming fewer and fewer. And the earth serpent is disappearing more and more. And of course, those of you who know about the great global serpents, they cross Bali. The great world serpents first worked with Robert Kuhn, I believe, another Glastonbury visionary. Now, the struggle the Western man has with the dragon is sort of epitomized here in a way in this magnificent carving from St Mary's Abbey in York. Anybody know St Mary's Abbey in York? Anybody been there? It's rather forgotten. Everybody goes to York Minster, but the ruins of St Mary's Abbey often get overlooked. But King Ethelstan, some of you may know him, he was one of the first overall kings of Britain, and he was a man who brought in the first stonemasons from possibly the Italian Greek culture who'd been living on Lake Como. And he brought them across and built the first abbey in the whole of England. Yeah, I know that there was probably little churches or chapels at Glastonbury before made of stone. But officially, and if you go through the Masonic record, if any of you are Freemasons, you'll know that St Mary's Abbey is seen as one of the most important temples of Freemasonry, because it was where the first stonemasons with Freemasonry came into the country and established a base in York. And this is part of one of the carvings from those incredible masons that came, showing this tussle between the two serpents. Now the Chinese have a different take on the dragon currents, as we've mentioned before. To the right we have the golden dragon, the male dragon who's over the landscape, over the hilltops, the female dragon who's in the valleys, touching the water energy, and the male touching the solar energy. So here's a perfect representation of the yin and yang dragon energies for Michael and Mary. Interesting enough, when we dowsed Mary current and the Ellen current, they dowsed as a colour purple, and the male currents are dowsing as a yellowy gold colour. So this temple in one of the royal palaces in China, the Forbidden City, that's where it's from, actually is a brilliant representation of what we were dowsing through the fields of England. And speaking of dowsers, Hamish Miller was probably the first to write about dowsing dragon lines. And he wasn't an ordinary dowser. He didn't come out from a water dowser and developed his skills into dowsing dragon lines. He seemed to be naturally attuned to the dragon force. And this came because he had a near-death experience where he left his body on the operating table. He heard all the conversations. He went across to the other side through the Great Tunnel, met some people who he's like his guardians, he would call them, his angels, and he felt that he was sent back for a purpose. And not long after he'd come after the operating table and survived the operation and recovered, he felt that he needed to enjoy life. He needed to have a second. He wanted to reincarnate himself, and so he wanted to explore the mysteries also, like I did after my experiences. I wanted to buy books on unexplained phenomena, research stone circles, go to interesting places. Same thing happened with Hamish, but he got into dowsing through a friend, and he started to find all kinds of patterns around. And it was Paul Broadhurst, of course, who came to one of his talks and listened to him dowsing these energies, and wondered if the Michael line, which John Michel had been writing about, had this energy. So, of course, that started the quest. From Land's End all the way up to Norfolk, they found not just one beam of energy, but two, and neither of them stayed on a straight course and followed a linear course, but they actually weaved around the Michael line like a caduceus. And I know you've seen this one before. The only thing I want to point out here is that there is 22 points of fusion in the Michael line. Now, node points are the most interesting aspects to dowsing on these dragon lines, because here the dragon line itself, which has a component of different bands, shrinks to a point and then goes into the earth for some reason, comes out again, expands out and carries on, as if the dragon current itself wants to connect with something deep inside the earth, or something special at that point. And so these points turned out to be key places of power along this alignment. Of course, Glastonbury has many node points, one in Chalicewell Garden, one on the side of the Tor, not the top, as some people think. It's actually on the side of the Tor. And the other one, where's the other one? Oh, is it Wariol Hill? I can't remember now. Yes, so, of course, most earliest depictions show the entwined serpents around the central pole. This one goes back 4,000 years, but we've gone through symbolism, so I'm going to move on. We've also gone through this one, so I'm going to talk about dragon mounds, because the Tor, to me, is a great dragon mound, a place where dragons are attracted to. Now, we've also found many dragon mounds throughout the country, and that certain kings in the past have used them as places of power, and they've kind of, in a way, used the energy of these mounds to further their political aims And classic examples of dragon mounds used as political centres are the Great Dragon Mound at Cardiff Castle, which was one time the political centre of Wales. This is a Druidic mound, dates back to the Iron Age. The White Mound, where Bran's head was buried, where Brutus, the first king of Britain, is supposed to be buried. This is the Tower of London that sits on top of it. It practically destroyed most of the mound while it was being built. And William the Conqueror quickly took over that mound and built the Tower of London on top of it. Some people wonder how the Normans came to actually take over this country so successfully. And if you look at the building work that went on as soon as King William took the crown, he was building upon key sacred mounds of dragon power around the whole of the country. It's easy to research. But before William the Conqueror came to the country, the Saxons were also using dragon mounds, and one of the best ones is Tamworth. A lot of people don't know that Tamworth was once the capital of England, because Tamworth belonged to this sort of kingdom of Mercia, and the kingdom of Mercia was the biggest central Saxon kingdom. And at one time, under Penda and a few other Saxon kings, Mercia was, all other kingdoms were subservient to Mercia, so making the royal palace at Tamworth the sort of political centre. And actually Tamworth Mound is the 4th largest in Britain. In Scotland, we have the Great Dragon Mound, where 2 serpents entwine a node underneath the tower, in Pittencrieff Park in Dunfermline. And Dunfermline used to be the capital of Scotland before Edinburgh. So look hard, you'll find that dragons have been used and manipulated by the kings in the past. One of my favourite dragon mounds is St Michael's Hill at Montacute. Does this remind you of a UFO that's landed? Isn't it? It's an incredible hill because it's been carved and shaped here. So, although today this is all covered by trees, you just look at it when it was deforested many, many years ago. Its shape is remarkable, and there's this trench running up to the top. What's interesting is you've got St Catherine's Church at the bottom, Montacute House, which has the 9 worthies of the greenstone across the front. This area is full of mystery and deserves a book in itself. A local priest here, I think in early Norman times, had a vision of a black flint cross buried in the hill, and he woke and he got his spade out and he went to a place that he'd seen in his dream, dug and found this black flint cross, which is supposed to have magical powers. But it had a curse with it as well, that it mustn't be used for evil purposes or warfare. But one king actually got to hear about this discovery, and actually it was the Saxon times. I just remember the connection with the king, because the Saxon king who took this cross took it out in front of his battle, in his standards. His men at the front, they carried up this black flint cross into battle to ward off the enemies, and that was the Battle of Hastings, and King Harold was unfortunately the one who lost. The flint cross then went to Waltham Abbey, and since then has disappeared. But yes, an interesting hill. The reason why I'm mentioning it is because I dowsed 2 dragon lines meeting here back in the 90s, but never really carried it through and to see where these dragon lines go. But there's a big mystery around here still waiting to be discovered. It's a mirror of the Tor in a way. It's connected to the Tor with alignments, as we've talked about. The other dragon hill that I came to discover and know a lot about is because it's one of the key hills on the spine of Albion, or the Blenheim line, that overlooks the old capital of England, Winchester. And here is a single bank and earth ditch with a clump of trees in the middle disguising a mound with a labyrinth on top. And for years this has been known as a kind of a hub of energy. It's known as St Catherine's Hill, and it is a hub, or a wheel of energy that seems to radiate out lines to all parts of the country, according to certain dowsers and earth mystery researchers, including Paul Devereux and John Michel. What I discovered on this hill was that there were two lines of power that were similar to the Michael and Mary, but they were slightly bigger. The Michael line, as Hamish found, had 10 bands within it. So here I'm dowsing a dragon line. And it can be divided into component parts, 12 with the Blenestein, 10 with the Michael, I think 8 with the Mary line, and about 10 with the Ellen current. So the male current had 2 more bands than the female. Why? That's probably because people sense that the male currents have a stronger solar energy than the female currents, which are softer. The other thing is the feminine currents seem to be drawn into valleys and springs and wells and caves and watery places, while the male dragons kept to kind of hilltop places and shrines. Certain rocks, unusual features in the landscape seem to be the target for the male current. And of course we were able to douse the colours using a colour disc to find that the feminine current was also not only had fewer bands but also had a violet colour to it, whereas the male currents had rather a golden colour. So, and this is how the node works out. They go into the ground and come out again, forming a kind of Maltese cross, if you like. And this is what Hamish found on the Michael line at Creech St Michael. I think this is in Somerset, isn't it? Creech St Michael. Here we see the bands of the Mary current crossing with the bands of the Michael current right in the middle. But the other thing is that each band also had a colour, and they sort of conform to the colours of the rainbow. So when somebody says that these are rainbow serpents, they're probably quite right in the fact that they contain the rainbow colours. So on top of Catherine's Hill, they started to create this dance, a Vesica Piscis dance, crossing at the centre beneath the mound, on top of the mound, under the trees, and coming out into the labyrinth here, and crossing in the middle. Now, those of you know that labyrinths are great tools for opening up the mind and asking questions, resolving problems. This, I think, is a brilliant place to actually tune in to the dragon energies of the spine of Albion, because you can walk, as you walk the path of the labyrinth on Catherine's Hill, you're actually tuning into both male and female serpents, and both sides of left and right brain are both working together as you, because the path is small, so you have to put one foot in front of another, so you have to be mentally aware of what you're doing. You can't just idly walk around. So, and that takes away from, is it the left, and brings the right brain more. So it's a very powerful tool. And this is the labyrinth. Of course, some of you have probably been up on St. Catherine's Hill and walked this labyrinth. But if you haven't, and you want to connect with dragon energy, this is a good place to introduce yourself to the dragon energy. It has a kind of physical guardian as well. That was encountered by one of the psychics working with Andrew Collins many, many years ago. And he was a kind of guardian of this labyrinth. I forgot his name, Marcus. It's just come through, Marcus, yeah. Node points along the spine of Albion, this great straight line from St. Catherine's Hill all the way up through 6 cities, also goes through close to an area called Clitheroe, where in Lancashire, on the Yorkshire borders. And on top of the hill here, there's an ancient mound with a castle on top of it, and the dragons both node inside the castle keep. But the female current crosses through this labyrinth on its way to node with the male up here. The reason why I mention is this, because when I first dowsed the male and female currents around this dragon hill in Clitheroe, there was no labyrinth here. And because it took 10 years to do the research and write, things were changing as we were opening up the currents and walking these dragon paths. And a local artist was inspired to create this labyrinth right on the feminine flow, which we were delighted to see years later when coming back. She had no idea of the energy there because we hadn't published anything. So it was collective consciousness working here with the dragon energy. And it helped to heal the town because walking the labyrinth also energized the lines, which energized the fertility and the harmony in both man and the land, as that ancient Toltec Indian told me. And Clitheroe is now a booming town, where it was once almost a ghost town when we first went down. Whether that's due to the Dragon Force, I don't know, or whether it's just you know, a rising consciousness of everything, and the dragon energy resurgence is only part of that. Royal White Stones is another node point of the spine of Albion, and here somebody was inspired to create a labyrinth right by the node point. Another good place to connect the spine of Albion. So this is the spine of Albion, the old Belenenstein, from the Isle of Wight, the Dragon Isle, right to the very top at Balnakeil, a dragon-shaped peninsula. It goes through the old cities of Winchester, Stratford-upon-Avon, which is another story to do with the cult of St. George, and Shakespeare, Birmingham, Manchester, Carlisle, Dunfermline, Inverness, 6 cities are all on the line. And the node points, because it took us 10 years to do all this, and at the very end, when I counted all the node points up, it came to 33. And it's interesting that there's 22 along the Michael line, 33 on the whole of the spine of Albion. But if you take off Scotland, there's 22 node points in England and 11 in Scotland. So there's an interesting number with 11. And of course, I was born on the 11th of the 11th. So there's strange things going on with number and sound as well. So 33 nodes, 33 is also the number of vertebrae in the human spine, which is how we got the name the spine of Albion. Now, each node point has its story to tell, and we encountered some strange things while working with these node points. One of my favourite node points, of course, is Dragon Hill itself. It's actually been known as Dragon Hill from Saxon times. And it's under here, according to legend, that Uther Pendragon is supposed to be buried. But the bold patch on top, of course, is where the dragon is supposed to have been slayed by St. George himself, according to legend, of course. But it's all allegory. If you look out in the landscape, you see the perfect northern horizon. You look back, you see the white horse. But because that hill has been known as Dragon Hill from Saxon times, this has only been known as a white horse since medieval times. So it's obvious that Dragon Hill is reflecting the image of a dragon that's supposed to have been slayed at that place by St. George. But then the problem is archaeology gets in the way. Archaeology discovered this dates back to the late Bronze Age, which has nothing to do with King Arthur or Uther Pendragon. But the name itself is a key, because the Dragon Hill is associated with Pendragon, the head of a dragon, Pendragon. And this, the head of the dragon here is an interesting place where there's an energy spiral coming out of it. And don't forget that heavy horses, if this was a horse, it would be a heavy horse. They never came to the country until after Roman times, and this predates when this country only had ponies. We never had proper full heavy white horses. So this is certainly not a white horse, it's a white dragon. It even has horns and a fiery beak and this great long tail. But I think the key to it was the view. I haven't got this view, but the view takes you along a pathway of another dragon path called the Oxfordshire Ley, and it passes through many sites all the way to a place called Guy's Cliff and the Royal White Stones. And I did a thing on Sky Globe and took it back to when the great figure was built in the Bronze Age or carved out of the turf. And at that time, Draco stood vertical on the horizon, and its head would be down in the hill. So you could actually draw a line as a cosmic axis from this hill with Draco winding around it, which we've got an image in the book. So it's a key point in time and remembered here, and it was a focal place for many tribes who worshipped and worked with the dragon energies. And this inspired Paul Weston and a few of us to actually go out and do some healing work, because Uffington is also the place where the Michael line crosses the Blenheim line. So we chose St. George's Day, perfect day, the Red Cross, crossing of the energies. I mean, we went to a place, Seven Barrows is the only feature nearest to the actual lines. So we chose the lines and not the currents because it's too complicated. So, and also the line wouldn't be there without the currents. The line is the third force. This is another thing not many people want to talk about. It's a trinity of energies because the lines are also dowsable. Many dowsers have also dowsed the straight line as a kind of a green energy. And we've seen images in the past of a green pole with red and white serpents going up it. And these green poles both come together in a field near the Seven Barrows. Now, for many years, there's nothing there. We did a ceremony there honouring the dragons of Michael and Mary, the Ellen Belinus, seeing golden light going down the lines, rejuvenating the land again, awakening Albion. And within a year, somebody had built this garden in the next field to where we did the meditation. And it's a healing herb garden. And it consists of all different types of herbs for aromatherapy and ordinary healing, apothecary. So I asked the people who built this whether they were inspired by the meeting of the dragon lines, and they had no idea that that was in the next field. But they just felt this was the right place. Again, people were tuning into the consciousness of these lines. As we were opening them up, people were just tuning in and falling into what they would feel their destiny was, and this was to do something at this place. And it's only later they understood why. Now, just to end the story with another healing incident, not all the node points were in good condition. Some of them were in really poor state, where the dragon lines were so small that they were barely traceable by our dowsing. And this place is Radcliffe Tower. It's just north of Manchester, south of Bury. And we often find when we're on a quest to do some healing that whatever you see when you arrive at that place is usually a reflection of what's going on with it. And when we arrived, we saw a man with quite an angry-looking man with a great pit bull terrier that was charging around the field, chewing up branches, and we were afraid to go near the tower because this fierce dog was snarling at everything. And the way this dog was moving around, it was like this. It reminded me of the dark energies that were swirling around this tower. And this is what we could actually see, the dark energy swirling around. We thought that how can we do something here? This is a node point upon a major spine of dragons in our country, and it's been manipulated by a very powerful family called the Radcliffes, who are descendants of the Blois family and other, going back to very Merovingians who came to this country. William the Conqueror gave them this site personally for this very powerful family. And it feels like they were using it as like they plugged into the mainstream of consciousness of dragon energies and just sucked it dry. And that Radcliffe Tower was a negative point on this time where you had to heal. But we couldn't get inside because our way was barred with iron gates. So we decided we'd try to heal it from a distance. And what happened is that over the years, when we told people about what was going on there, they managed to get in and create a healing circle of crystals. And eventually, the council decided to do something about the tower and restore it. And they open it up to the public again. And it's now a bit of a success story. But it all came out of our discovery a little bit further up the line at Castlefield. Castlefield is just an old it's where the barges used to meet and unload all their goods to the Manchester warehouses. Today it's a fashionable place where people go for drinks in the evening and restaurants. But the dragon lines are taking us through all the old places. Castlefield was once the centre of a huge Roman town, and that the epicentre of that Roman town was a well. Now the Roman town is gone, but the epicentre of that Roman town, this is where we discovered centres were very important. And the Romans cherished the centres and nourished them by digging a pit down into the earth to connect with the underground streams, and then make it their honorary centre, connecting the sky with the earth and the land. And they'd done it also on this dragon path. Now, whether the Ellen current came to here because it's a source of power, or they knew it was there and they built the well there, we're not sure. But the well is still there. In amongst all these people drinking and eating, the sacred point is still there, and it wanting to be known, wanting to be honoured. And this is what Hamish said to us, you know, that the dragon current is all around us. You know, it wants to be known, it wants you to recognise it and help heal so that we can actually raise our own consciousness as well as the consciousness of the planet. Thanks very much.